In just 47 seconds, everything Pam Bondi thought she knew about political warfare crumbled before her eyes. The former Florida Attorney General didn't see it coming. She didn't prepare for what reply Madeleine Dean had waiting in that manila folder. Cameras captured every micro-expression as Bondi's confident facade shattered like glass. The committee room froze. What did Madeleine Dean reveal that made one of Trump's most trusted legal warriors collapse in front of the entire nation? It was 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when Pam Bondi walked into the Hart Senate office building, carrying the weight of expectation and the armor of experience. She'd prosecuted killers, faced down drug cartels, and survived the brutal politics of Florida. This was supposed to be routine, a confirmation hearing for Attorney General, a few softball questions from Republicans, some predictable attacks from Democrats, and then on to the job that would crown her career. But Madeleine Dean sat in that committee room like a prosecutor who'd already won her case before the trial began. The Pennsylvania Democrat had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, 3 months digging through financial records, campaign contributions, and sealed court documents that most people thought would never see daylight. Her hands rested calmly on a thick folder marked "Confidential Eyes Only" in red letters that seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent light. Bondi took her seat at the witness table with practiced confidence. Her navy blue suit was impeccable, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her voice clear and strong as she raised her right hand for the oath. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?" "I do," Bondi replied, her voice carrying across the packed gallery where reporters leaned forward, smartphones recording every word. The first 2 hours proceeded exactly as scripted. Republican senators lobbed friendly questions about her prosecutorial record in Florida, her commitment to law and order, her vision for the Department of Justice. Bondi answered with the smooth professionalism of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire career. She spoke about fighting human trafficking, taking on corrupt politicians regardless of party, and her unwavering dedication to the Constitution. But then Madeleine Dean's turn arrived. The committee chair, Senator Chuck Grassley, nodded toward the Pennsylvania Congresswoman. The chair recognizes Representative Dean for 20 minutes. Dean adjusted her reading glasses and opened that thick folder with deliberate slowness. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Thank you, Miss Chairman," Dean began, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made several committee members shift in their seats. "Miss Bondi, you've spoken eloquently about your commitment to justice and fighting corruption. I'd like to explore that commitment in some detail." Bondi nodded confident. This was familiar territory. She'd built her entire career on being tough on corruption. "I'd be happy to discuss my record, Congresswoman." "Excellent," Dean replied, pulling out a document from her folder. "Let's start with your time as Florida Attorney General. Are you familiar with the case of Florida versus Meridian Development Corporation?" The question hit Bondi like a physical blow. Her confident expression flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression that the C-SPAN cameras caught in high definition. Meridian developed the case she thought had been buried so deep it would never surface again. "I handled thousands of cases as Attorney General," Bondi replied carefully. "I'd need you to be more specific about which aspects of that case you're referring to." Dean smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a prosecutor who just watched a defendant take the bait. "Of course. Let me refresh your memory. Meridian Development Corporation was accused of defrauding elderly Florida residents out of 100 and a timeshare scam that affected over 8. Your office had a slam dunk case. Documented fraud, clear evidence, witnesses ready to testify. And then, mysteriously, the case was dropped. Do you recall that decision?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bondi's hands resting on the table tensed almost imperceptibly. "As I said, I handled many cases. Sometimes prosecutorial discretion requires difficult decisions based on available evidence and resources." "Prosecutorial discretion," Dean repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Is that what you call it when you drop a major fraud case 3 days after receiving a $50,000 campaign contribution from Meridian's parent company?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Republican committee members looked stunned. Bondi's face went pale, but she tried to maintain her composure. "Congresswoman, I resent the implication. My decisions as Attorney General were always based on the law and the facts, never on political considerations or campaign contributions." Dean opened her folder wider and pulled out a second document. "Miss Bondi, I have here a copy of a check for $50,000 made out to Bondi for Attorney General from Atlantic Holdings LLC, dated March 15. Atlantic Holdings is the parent company of Meridian Development. The check was deposited on March 16. On March 18, your office filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Meridian Development. Are you telling this committee that this timing is purely coincidental?" The committee room erupted. Reporters frantically typed on their phone. Camera flashes strobed like lightning. Bondi gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "I don't recall the specific timing of those events," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. It sounded hollow, desperate. Dean wasn't finished. She pulled out a third document, this one thick with highlighted sections. "Perhaps this will help refresh your memory. This is an internal memo from your Chief of Staff, dated March 17, 2019, one day before you dropped the Meridian case." The memo reads, and I quote, "AG Bondi has decided to prioritize cases with higher probability of conviction. The Meridian case will be suspended, pending further review." But here's the interesting part, Ms. Bondi. This memo was written before your office had completed its investigation, before your prosecutors had finished reviewing all the evidence. How do you explain making a decision to drop a case before you'd even finished building it? Bondi's breathing became shallow. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Despite the air conditioning, she looked toward her legal team, but they were as stunned as everyone else in the room. The memo you're referencing may be taken out of context. Prosecutorial decisions involve many factors that aren't always captured in internal communications. Context, Dean said. Not, "Let me provide some context for you, Miss Bondi." She pulled out yet another document. The folder seemed bottomless, like a magician's hat, producing increasingly damaging evidence. "This is a recorded phone conversation between you and Jeffrey Morrison, CEO of Atlantic Holdings, dated March 4. The recording was obtained through a federal wiretap, as part of an ongoing FBI investigation into corporate corruption in Florida. Would you like me to play it for the committee?" The world stopped spinning. Bondi's face drained of all color. Her hands began to tremble visibly. The confident prosecutor who had walked into this room 3 hours ago was gone, replaced by a cornered defendant, watching her life explode in real time. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination," Bondi whispered. The committee room erupted in chaos. Senators shouted over each other. Reporters rushed toward the exits to file breaking news alerts. Camera operators pushed forward for better angles. But Dean wasn't done. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Miss Bondi, you cannot invoke the Fifth Amendment in a confirmation hearing. You're not under criminal investigation here. You're seeking to become the nation's top law enforcement official. The American people have a right to know if their potential attorney general sold justice for campaign contributions." Bondi looked like she was about to vomit. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. She clutched the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. I need a recess. I need to consult with my attorneys. The witness's time has not expired," Dean continued relentlessly. "I have 3 more documents I'd like to review with you. This email from your Deputy Attorney General, expressing concerns about dropping the Meridian case. This bank transfer showing the $50,000 going directly into your campaign account, not your general legal defense fund as initially reported. And this sworn affidavit from a Meridian victim, who tried to contact your office about the case dismissal, and was told by your staff that the Attorney General's decision is final and not subject to review." Each document hit Bondi like a physical blow. Her perfect composure, built over decades of legal and political combat, crumbled completely. Tears welled in her eyes. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely audible. I made mistakes. The timing was unfortunate. But I never intentionally what, Ms. Bondi?" Dean pressed. "Never intentionally took money in exchange for dropping a case. Never intentionally betrayed the trust of 8,000 elderly fraud victims. Never intentionally sold your office to the highest bidder. That's when it happened. 47 seconds of total destruction that would be replayed on every news channel for weeks. Bondi tried to stand, perhaps to leave, perhaps to regain some dignity, but her legs wouldn't support her. She collapsed back into her chair, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The woman who had sent killers to death row, who had faced down the most dangerous criminals in Florida, who had been Trump's sword and shield through 2 impeachments, was broken. The cameras captured every second. Her political career, her legal reputation, her future, all of it died in that committee room in less than a minute. But Madeleine Dean closed her folder with the finality of a judge's gavel. Mr. Chairman, I believe we have our answer about Ms. Bondi's fitness to serve as Attorney General. The hearing was suspended. Bondi was helped from the room by her legal team, her confirmation prospects as dead as her dignity. By noon, Bondi Breebury was trending worldwide. By evening, 3 more whistleblowers had come forward with additional evidence of corruption during her tenure in Florida. By the next morning, Bondi had withdrawn her nomination and announced she was leaving public service permanently. Madeleine Dean had done in 47 seconds what dozens of political opponents had failed to do in decades. She had exposed the truth about Pam Bondi's corruption and ended her career with the power of facts, evidence, and relentless preparation. But what happened in the hours and days following that devastating collapse would prove even more shocking than the hearing itself. Within 20 minutes of Bondi's breakdown, her phone began buzzing with frantic calls from Trump's inner circle. Steve Bannon, according to leaked recordings that would surface later, screamed at her through the phone, "How the hell did you not know Dean had this shit? You just destroyed everything." But Bondi couldn't even She sat in a bathroom stall in the Hart building, mascara streaking down her cheeks, hyperventilating as the reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. Her political career wasn't just over. It was obliterated so completely that historians would study the hearing as a masterclass in political destruction. The immediate aftermath was brutal. Fox News pivoted to damage control, but the evidence was too damning for CNN played the collapse footage on loop. The image of America's potential top law enforcement official sobbing became the defining political moment of the year. Social media exploded with devastating memes that made Bondi's humiliation global and permanent. By Wednesday evening, the FBI announced they were opening a federal investigation into corruption charges against Bondi. What they found made the Meridian scandal look like a parking ticket. Internal documents revealed that Bondi's office had dropped charges in 17 major cases involving companies that donated to her campaigns. The alleged bribes exceeded $800,000, one of the largest corruption schemes in Florida history. Investigators discovered that Bondi had protected several Trump properties from fraud investigations, including questionable condo sales that could have cost Trump millions in penalties. Thursday brought the most devastating revelation yet. Rep. Dean, riding high on her committee triumph, called another press conference. This time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were 6 elderly Florida residents who had lost their life savings in the Meridian development scam that Bondi had mysteriously dropped. Their faces, weathered by age and hardship, told the story of American justice betrayed. Margaret Rodriguez, 78, stepped up to the microphone with trembling hands, but a voice strong with righteous anger. "Ms. Bondi took money to let the people who stole my husband's pension go free," she said, her words cutting through the Washington political noise like a knife through silk. "We trusted her to protect us. Instead, she sold us out for campaign cash. My husband died believing that justice had failed him. Now I know why." The human cost of Bondi's corruption, personified by these elderly victims, transformed the story from political scandal to moral outrage. The optics were devastating. A blonde, perfectly coiffed political elite, who had literally sold justice, while elderly Americans lost their homes and dignity. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or damaging. Friday morning brought news that sent shockwaves through the Republican establishment. The Florida Bar Association announced they were beginning disbarment proceedings against Bondi, citing conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice, and dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. If successful, the disbarment would end not just her political career,
but her ability to practice law anywhere in the United States, her legal career, built over 3 decades, would be destroyed as thoroughly as her political aspiration. But perhaps the most humiliating moment came during a hastily arranged press conference at her Tampa law firm. Bondi, looking haggard and defeated, attempted to give her side of the story. She had prepared a statement denying criminal wrongdoing and claiming she was the victim of a political vendetta. She never got to deliver it. Halfway through her opening remarks, protesters who had snuck into the building began chanting "Justice for sale, Bondi for jail." Security tried to remove them, but their voices carried clearly over the news cameras. Bondi, already fragile from the week's events, broke down again. She fled the podium, leaving behind a chaos of shouting reporters and unanswered questions. The image of her second public breakdown in 4 days cemented her reputation as a political pariah who couldn't handle the consequences of her own corruption. Even her closest allies began abandoning her. Governor DeSantis, who had praised her nomination just a week earlier, released a statement saying he was deeply concerned by the allegations and calling for a thorough investigation. Senator Marco Rubio, who had planned to introduce her at the confirmation hearing, canceled all appearances and stopped returning her calls. The Republican Party apparatus that had lifted her to prominence now treated her like a toxic asset that could contaminate anyone who came too close. The final blow came the following Monday. The Washington Post published a bombshell investigation, revealing that Bondi's corruption extended far beyond Florida. Working with a network of investigative journalists, they documented a pattern of pay-to-play politics that spanned her entire career. Campaign contributions followed by favorable legal decisions, speaking fees from companies under investigation, consulting contracts with firms seeking to avoid prosecution. The investigation painted a picture of systematic corruption that made her original confirmation hearing look like gentle questioning. But it was the human stories that truly destroyed her legacy. The Post found dozens of victims whose cases had been dropped or reduced after their victimizers paid Bondi's campaign funds. A domestic violence victim, whose abuser's charges were reduced after his wealthy family donated. Environmental victims whose polluters escaped prosecution after contributing to her re-election. Working families who lost their homes to predatory lenders that Bondi protected in exchange for political support. Each story was a knife thrust into whatever remained of Bondi's reputation. By the end of that devastating week, Pam Bondi had become a cautionary tale about corruption, hubris, and the power of thorough investigative work. Madeleine Dean, meanwhile, was elevated to hero status among Democrats and grudgingly respected, even by Republicans who admired her preparation and prosecutorial skill. Dean's methodical destruction of Bondi became a template for how to conduct accountability hearings, studied in law schools and political science courses, as an example of how facts and evidence could triumph over political connections and partisan protection. The lasting image wasn't just Bondi's collapse. It was the contrast between Dean's calm professionalism and Bondi's emotional breakdown, between preparation and arrogance, between public service and self-service. 6 months later, Bondi pled guilty to federal corruption charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The woman who had once been considered for the Supreme Court was led away in handcuffs, her fall from grace complete and irreversible. Madeleine Dean attended the sentencing, not in triumph, but in solemn recognition that justice, though delayed, had finally been served. The last image of Bondi that America saw was her collapse in that committee room, the moment when justice finally caught up with someone who had spent years selling it to the highest bidder.